Welcome. Pastor Chuck Blair of New Church Live, and I wanted to share some thoughts today around Good Friday. Good Friday is the time where, as Christians, we celebrate sort of an odd bringing together. It's both a day that sees a great deal of tragedy. It's a day where we acknowledge that Jesus, the Lord, was crucified. That happened on Friday, traditionally on a Friday. And the reason behind that, there's a huge story behind that. Essentially, the Roman leaders and the religious leaders at that time saw him as a threat, even though he wasn't really a threat. He was a spiritual threat, even if you could call it that. Certainly wasn't a political threat. But anyhow, he was put to death as in a way that is, sort of defies our imagination, a way that was incredibly cruel and barbaric. And why then do we call it Good Friday? And I think we call it Good Friday because it's where we see so much of the character and the way of Jesus, showing us like this is how God will have us handle the challenges in our life, the most serious, unimaginably difficult challenges, and how we handle it and how we see our way through it. It's a totally different way of approaching life. And that's why it's called the third way. It's not an either or. It's not about anger and vengefulness, any of that. It's this third way. It's this third way. And I want to bring up two parts of that third way. And they're just small parts of this Good Friday story that I find incredibly, incredibly powerful. The first is that it is a time of desperation. And one of the fascinating things that Jesus says at this time is, this statement of real worry and concern and almost despair, and where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's a fascinating line. It's interesting because one of my personal heroes, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was part of the plot to kill Hitler, amazing Lutheran pastor, who was sort of anti-Nazi right from the get-go. He said that was the passage that allowed him to actually be a Christian, because it welcomes that human condition. And we see in the new church this Easter holiday as being where the divine and the human come together. And there's still that human part that, my God, why have you forsaken me? So important to be able to say that and to get that there are those places. I've had a number of times working down at the Ronald McDonald House in Philadelphia where people who know I'm a pastor will pull me aside and have said, like, you got to explain this to me. Like, my kid has cancer. I don't get it. And I don't think my job is to explain it to them per se. My job is to first acknowledge, yeah, there's going to be some questions there. There's going to be some why? How can this be happening? And I'll quote that. I'll quote Jesus' word, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that idea that if Jesus had to move through doubt, guess what? So do we. It's just part of the journey. And I know the times I've shared that, it's been well received. People get that. And it creates a much more approachable view of God. And that's the whole point of the divine human, to have a human approach to what's divine, to having divinity incarnate in flesh so we can actually see it. And then the other line, friends, that's so incredibly powerful is where Jesus, in the midst of all this turmoil and all this anger and all this rancor, says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do. It's hard to imagine being in that much physical pain as part of a crucifixion, that much mental pain as part of a crucifixion as well. And to think in terms of this statement, that what he offered at that moment in the midst of the greatest pain was forgiveness. See, that's the third way. That's the way that says, here's pain. And here's Jesus saying, and the pain stops here. Vengeance stops here. Anger stops here. I'm not going to pass it on. I'm going to transform it. And forgiveness is what transforms that pain. That's the third way. And it's easy to look at that and think, well, that's not powerful, and then people will never learn their lessons, whatever that is. Clearly, people have learned Jesus' lesson, which is why there's over, 1 billion Christians today. It's an incredibly powerful position to take, incredibly difficult, almost beyond our human capacity to understand, but incredibly powerful as well. And with all that, folks, on Good Friday, important as well, given the current times that we're facing. From a new church perspective, I've found this fascinating for decades now. What many consider to be the Lord's final temptation was this. His final temptation wasn't evil, vengefulness, any of that. It was angels whispering to him that this is hopeless. There's no way you can save humanity. There's no way humanity is salvageable. Really important to know that oftentimes is our last temptation too. We don't look at hopelessness as a temptation, but it is. Because once we go there, there's very little we can do in terms of our bit to make the world a better place. So this Good Friday, please understand that, of course, this is a time filled with challenges, doubts, questions, and all that. Please also understand that it's a time in which we can offer forgiveness to the world, forgiveness to ourselves, forgiveness to other people, even in the most challenging of circumstances. And thirdly, it's also a time where we can be as clear as possible that the last temptation might be hopelessness. And our job is to hold on to hope as best we can. It's not a hope that this ends tomorrow, but it's a hope that we march through this together. See, resurrection, folks, is not something that ends suffering. It's something that gives us a way to transform suffering. So let's live into that this Easter. I'm wishing you all the very, very best on Easter Sunday. Feel free to join me Easter Sunday at 10:30 a.m. at New Church Live, or get to any church of your choosing. I'm wishing you all the very best. God bless everyone this Easter holiday. Take care.